Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's class. Let's go ahead and begin with prayers. Let me put those on the screen, and Jana will be happy to lead us in those.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the
Founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer,
the
one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
Short mandala offering, once in English. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamyatayami. Refuge in Bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Soki Choknam La Jamchu Bartu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chanyan Ki Pe Sonam Ki Drolam Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chodam Soki Choknam La Jamchu Bartu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chanyan Ki Pe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. Thank you, Jana. Thank you all. Let's do a short meditation to kind of focus our minds a bit, and then we'll set our motivation. So just spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath, trying to be present with the breath whenever the mind wanders away. Just gently guide the mind back to the breath. We'll do this in silence for a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation.
Now, to set our motivation, we can recall how our text is setting out these two main goals that the Buddha taught that each of us can achieve. The first one is what he calls high status, meaning a good rebirth. In this human life, we have incredible opportunity, but this life will come to an end. And it's important that we create the causes to have another existence as good as this one, perhaps even better, where we can meet with the Dharma at a very early age, use that life well, continuing to have good rebirths until we attain a more definite result. And that's our first level of motivation, to be here with that intention to not just have a desire for happiness in this life, but also the happiness of future lives. But of course, the more important goal for Buddhist practitioners is to attain what our text calls supreme beatitude. The idea is that we need a more superior goal, one that is certain and definite, to bring us happiness. That definiteness is found in the states of liberation and enlightenment. When we attain those states, then we are assured of only experiencing well-being. So, of those two, we can start certainly with looking at our own liberation, recognizing that we have been going from life to life since beginningless time, continuing to experience the varieties of suffering, dissatisfaction, discontentment. And there is a way out. We can attain our own freedom from samsara, from the round of cyclic existence. And this is, again, a more lasting goal that we can aspire to achieve. So we can set our motivation on that second level of supreme beatitude, quite specifically with regard to attaining liberation, attaining our own freedom. But if we were to attain that and leave behind all the other sentient beings who have been so kind to us, have helped us in so many ways, lifetime after lifetime, would really be quite selfish. So we aspire to the other goal within Supreme Beatitude, enlightenment, Buddhahood, the state where we will have achieved our greatest potential, and we will also be perfectly kind of capable of helping others to achieve their potential. So this is the ultimate and ideal goal to bring to our teachings tonight. This motivation that aspires to develop ourselves completely, to go beyond our own individual liberation, to attain the state of Buddhahood, so that we can help all other beings to do the same. So set your motivation to that idea of bodhicitta, the mind that aspires to fully awaken in order to help all sentient beings. And then you can open your eyes fully and we'll start the class. So again, we're in this section of the text where we are looking at the advice. We finished the advice for householders. Now we're looking at the advice for both householders and those who've left behind the home life, who are ordained and so on. And we've entered into this, there's a few parts to this, I think 3 parts in total. And the first one had to do with kind of the both of these goals that I just mentioned in our motivation. Right, the Buddha said that we can attain a more temporal result, which is, our ability to have another good rebirth, to have ideal conditions while we're in samsara. But then there's the goal of supreme beatitude, and there's a second section that we'll go into tonight very shortly, where we talk mostly about that goal. So in the last class, again, there was a lot of technical stuff around attaining the four concentrations, the five or four dhyanas, as they're often called. And then we talked about these five, that's where five is coming in, these five obstacles. And we had verse 44. Let me go ahead and reintroduce you to that verse, and then we will carry on with the commentary. We didn't quite finish the commentary for this. So let me put that on the screen. Let me put that up there. Let's see, verse 44. Let me make it a little bit larger for everyone. Okay. Excitement and regret. This is the first obstacle. Malice is the second. Languor and sleep, the third obstacle. Sense desires is the fourth. And then doubt is the fifth. It says, recognize these five obstacles as thieves who steal the riches of virtue. So we primarily talked about them in the context of our meditation practice, how excitement and regret are those states of mind that draw us out of our meditation. And we get excited about various past objects of enjoyment, what have you, vacations we took, wonderful things we've seen and done. And then regret also is directed to the past, but in a kind of a negative way, where we are regretting things that we didn't do in our past or that we did do in our past. And of course, those can draw us away from our meditation by getting preoccupied with those things of the past. Malice, the second one. Malice has, again, disturbance to the mind when we have some ill will towards others, some hatred, what have you. That's an obvious obstacle to our practice. And then the pair, languor and sleep, or dullness and sleep, these are also kind of put in the same category because they act in a similar way. And there are other reasons that we went through last week. But the main reason is that when we have dullness and sleep, they draw the mind in, whereas excitement and regret were drawn out, away from the object. So when the mind kind of caves in on itself through kind of this bringing the mind in too much to where we lose our focus, that is, again, a problem for our meditation. And so, again, these two are put together as something that we need to overcome. The fourth of these is sense desires. Sense objects are constantly tantalizing for us, and we can be sitting on our cushion and suddenly, have the thought of some ice cream that we got at the store that's sitting in the freezer waiting for us to, open it up and eat it. Or we can have, things pop into our minds of, beautiful music we'd like to be enjoying, or a walk out in nature on a nice day when we're trying to sit and meditate or what have you. All of these sense desires do, again, draw us away from our current kind of being in the present, being in our meditation. And then doubt. By doubt, we mean an afflicted doubt. Having some level of doubt in our practice is perfectly fine, because you're not expected to accept everything that the Buddha says right from the beginning. We go through a process of assimilating it into our understanding, and we might have doubts that we have to overcome. Here is where we have this two-pointed mind that cannot decide where to go. So an afflicted doubt kind of creates an obstacle for us, in terms of our meditation or other practice, other study, learning, what have you. So these are identified in this text and in some of the Buddhist sutras as being five obstacles, primarily to meditation, but also to our practice of virtue. So we went through, again, the kind of basic explanation of these. Let me pick up where we left off, and this kind of summarizes things kind of nicely, I think. It was on this page here, where we talk about why are they called the five obstacles. It is because they are detrimental to the three trainings. Again, we talked about them mainly in regard to meditation, but also the trainings in morality, as well as the training in wisdom. So it says here, the attitudes of sense desires and malice, those were again the fourth and the second of the five, are detrimental to superior morality, in that the craving for sense objects prevents one from adopting the practice of morality in the first place, right? Because we're so caught up in all of these, sensory experiences and what have you, that it's hard for us to kind of control our morality. And where morality has been adopted, animosity or malice prevents one from putting into practice those instructions which are given by another person. So again, this is the way that we can see them playing a role in curtailing some of our practice of morality. Certainly having malice or animosity towards beings is going to be the foundation for only bad morality, right? Because eventually we'll say and do something that we regret. Um, but the craving for sense objects, again, we do tend to lose our moral compass often when we're dealing with that. Okay, so then we're going on to the second of the three trainings. The first is morality. The second is concentration or meditation. And it says here, languor and sleep are detrimental to superior concentration, for they cause the mind to become enervated while one is meditating to achieve shamatha. Again, the weakening of the mind due to languor and sleep don't allow us to be fully engaged in our meditation. And this word shamatha, this is a meditative stabilization. So when we are trying to achieve kind of single-pointed concentration on an object, one of the big obstacles is the tendency of the mind to kind of cave in on itself. I talked last week, I think, about how in our meditation, we essentially need two main aspects. One is the stability of the mind, and that is disturbed by the drawing of the mind outwards because the mind is out and then we have to bring it back in, out and bring it back in. And I suppose there's some stability issues with this drawing in of the mind too. But the main obstacle we have when the mind gets drawn in too much and we have dullness and sleep is that then we don't have any clarity. Stability and clarity are the two features to having really effective single-pointed meditation. The mind has to be able to remain as much as possible on the object, and it has to be very clear and intense. Some people have the idea when they meditate, it's all about kind of relaxing, and there's a relaxation that occurs in the mind and body when we meditate. But it's not like we go to sleep, in our cushion. That's not a good meditation practice. We have to have the mind really fully engaged in what we're doing, attentive, alert, clear, seeing things very clearly, because this is the kind of the type of mind that we are trying to generate, so we can then unite it with the third training of wisdom. If it's very stable and clear, then our wisdom has a proper support to be able to take root and develop. So that's the idea behind these two, this pair here, that is the third of the five obstacles, languor and sleep. Now they relate excitement and regret to the third training, the training in wisdom. Excitement and regret are a detriment to superior wisdom because they cause the mind to become diverted outward. And when one is engaged in meditation, that involves deep reasoning. So when you're involved in kind of this reasoning of the mind, you don't want the mind getting caught up in distractions that are going to draw you away from that. Wisdom depends upon analysis. Remember that we have, two main types of meditation. First is the stabilizing to make the mind very focused. And then we introduce analytical wisdom or analytical meditation, which is to help us to develop wisdom. We have to analyze things, come to understand how things exist conventionally and how they exist ultimately. So essentially, these are the main ways that these are being kind of lined up in regard to the way that they can be detrimental to the three higher trainings. So I think we touched on four. We have just the fifth one now, doubt. What is doubt's role as an obstacle? It's detrimental to both of the last two trainings, again, concentration and wisdom. For without resolving any uncertainty that may arise while meditating, one cannot remain fixed in the state of equipoise, which is the union of shamatha, meditative stabilization, or the second higher training, and vipassana. Vipassana is usually translated as special insight. And we have these kind of two minds that we're trying to bring together. The foundation is morality. On the basis of that, we can engage in concentration to develop shamatha, to develop this kind of meditative stabilization that is often called calm abiding. Calm abiding is this, ability for the mind to remain single-pointedly focused on whatever object we choose. Very highly advanced state of meditation. Again, the mind very stable and clear. But we need then also to have this mind of vipassana, of superior insight, that we unite those two. Eventually, they call this the union of calm abiding and special insight. And this is the foundation for all of our deeper realizations. And those deeper realizations are what are essential for achieving the goal of supreme beatitude, this, more lasting, definite peace of individual liberation or enlightenment, again, that we talked about in the motivation tonight. But it also is certainly helpful in creating the causes for good rebirths, because then, our morality will be reinforced through concentration and wisdom and so on. So all three of these higher trainings play a very definite role. And we can even divide up everything that the Buddha taught into those three baskets of teachings, those that teach primarily Vinaya or morality, those that teach concentration, the Sutra basket, and then those that teach wisdom, the Abhidharma basket. So everything the Buddha taught was to help us to cultivate those three higher trainings. They're emphasized sometimes more in regard to the goal of individual liberation, that is the means to achieve your own liberation. But in the goal of achieving Buddhahood, they're equally present. We need all three. Morality, concentration, and wisdom are three of the six perfections of a bodhisattva. We looked at those many classes ago in the very beginning of the text. So doubt can be an obstacle to both our concentration and our wisdom, because if we have this, again, single or double-pointed mind that is not able to focus on things because we're still in this place of, is it this, is it that, some kind of lack of certainty with regard to the Dharma, with regard to the teachings. We have to resolve those doubts, or we can't be fully committed to either of those two. So that's the idea behind those acting as obstacles. So any questions on that or anything else from last week before we move on? I just wanted to wrap that section up first before getting into new material. Okay, then let's go to our next section. You probably caught a peek of it when it was on the screen there. This is the pursuance of supreme beatitude. Again, this is the term that's used here. It's a bit of a strange phrase. I've never seen it before in Buddhism. Again, we usually call this a certain or definite goodness. So the Buddha taught the goal of a high status, getting a good rebirth, as a more temporal goal. And then he taught supreme beatitude or definite goodness as the lasting goal that we can get. It's definite in its goodness, in its beatitude, or whatever phrase we use. And so this includes the two goals of achieving your own liberation and achieving enlightenment for all beings. So we have, again, 3 points that are going to be covered in this. And the first of the 3 points in this division, as it says there, concerns meditation upon what are called the 5 powers and the 5 strengths. They're the same terms, but they have a different label depending upon when they happen in what's called the path of preparation. Before I go on to this, I do want to just mention briefly, and this is a quite complex topic. I've done a whole course for Thupten Normaling down in Santa Fe on what are called the grounds and paths. But when you take the kind of the whole bodhisattva path, from like when you enter the path all the way to when you achieve Buddhahood, we can talk about 5 individual paths that are dictated upon various levels of spiritual development. When you enter into the first path, you're essentially entering in, I'm going to talk about it as from the bodhisattva point of view. When you come in as a bodhisattva, you enter into the path through achieving what we call spontaneous bodhicitta, uncontrived bodhicitta. This mind of bodhicitta that we all meditated on tonight at the beginning, when you get to a place where you don't even need to go through a meditation on it, you don't need to use the techniques that are taught to develop it, it just arises naturally within you. You see a sentient being and you immediately have the wish to become enlightened for their sake. It becomes a part of the fabric of your mind in a sense, and that already involves some level of meditative concentration to make it quite stable. When that happens, you enter into the Mahayana path. And you enter into what is initially called the path of accumulation. It's a path of accumulating the kind of the merits that are involved in helping you to move forward, as well as the wisdom that you need to cultivate in order to enter into the next path. When you enter into this path again through uncontrived bodhicitta, you enter into the second path through having a union of calm abiding and special insight, these 2 minds that we bring together of concentration and wisdom. Observing emptiness. And we're going to talk about emptiness. I hate to say it's on the agenda for tonight again, so we will get to it eventually. When you have that kind of perfect understanding of emptiness through a deep meditative practice, then you move into what's called the path of preparation. There are 4 levels of the path of preparation. We're going to see that the 5 powers are one part of it and the 5 strengths are the other part of it. But anyway, we'll go on then and talk about the other 5 paths and then go to our text. This path of preparation, it's called path of preparation because it's preparing you to have a direct insight into emptiness, meaning a non-conceptual insight into emptiness. When you enter into the path of preparation, you're still thinking of emptiness conceptually. You're not knowing emptiness in its bare state. You're using the medium of an idea of emptiness, an image of emptiness, if you will. This is how conceptuality knows. It knows things through that what we call a mental image, a mental aspect of it that isn't the real object. So you are getting at emptiness through this indirectly, but you haven't directly known emptiness. This is a profound moment in the Bodhisattva's spiritual development. They enter into what's called the path of seeing. Through strengthening their meditation on emptiness throughout the path of preparation, all 4 levels, you get to the final level. And in a single meditative session, you sit down and you go into your analysis of that, or you arrive at emptiness, and the conceptual image of emptiness falls away. And emptiness is known by your mind. This is what they say. I'm not talking from personal experience. Your mind and emptiness seem to merge as if one. There's no differentiation at that point of subject and object. You are knowing emptiness in a very profound way, with no conceptuality involved at all. You come out of the path of seeing with that knowledge, and at that point, you're what's called a superior being, an Arya being. And that means that then you have kind of an irreversible nature already. You will not degenerate back to a lack of understanding that because you've seen emptiness in that way. It's an unchangeable experience. So then you go on to what's called the path of meditation. This is the 4th path, and the path where we keep familiarizing ourselves with emptiness and removing more and more of what we call our obscurations. You first remove the afflictive obscurations that are all of that ignorance, clinging to the opposite of emptiness, clinging to things to be real and concrete and inherently existent. And then you eventually remove the subtle imprints of that ignorance, which are what's keeping you from being a Buddha. Through this extended, what are called the bhumis, the grounds that go from the path of seeing up through the path of meditation, you eventually get to the 10th ground. And at that point, when you go into your meditative equipoise, you're removing the subtlest obscurations in the mind, the last little bit of what kind of contaminates and pollutes your mind. And you enter into Buddhahood, what's called in this schema, the path of no more learning. No more school then. You don't have to learn anything. You've learned it all. You become a Buddha and you have this perfect omniscient mind that knows everything and that can then also benefit all beings. So going back to what we're talking about here, we're going to talk about the path of preparation in particular. When these 5 factors that are the 5 powers and the 5 strengths gain their ability to help you to generate eventually a direct realization of emptiness. Okay. So again, there's a whole study of what are called paths and grounds that goes through a lot more detail of all of this, but that's enough to kind of get us on the page. So the 5 powers and the 5 strengths. It says those entities which are hindrances and to be abandoned having been presented, the 5 obstacles, the next verse presents dharmas to be adopted, those which are favorable for the attainment of liberation. Again, because we're in this section where we're talking about, and by the way, when it says liberation, it doesn't just mean individual liberation, it means also Buddhahood, which is liberation as well, liberation from all the obscurations. So verse 45 says, one should strive in earnest after faith, number 1. Number 2 is vigor or effort. Number 3, recollection or mindfulness. Number 4, samadhi or meditative stabilization. And number 5, wisdom. The 5 supreme dharmas, also known as the strengths, the powers, and the summits. I've never really heard of this term, them being called the summits. We usually talk about them being the strengths and the powers, but nonetheless, we'll can certainly talk about them after we've had that direct realization, having a particular kind of peak to them, summit, if you will, of those being brought to their full fruition. So we have the first one, faith. Again, we talked about faith many moons ago. When we started this text, there was a verse on faith. Faith is a sincere belief, or I prefer the word conviction or confidence in the Four Noble Truths. The truths is abbreviated here. And this is kind of the object that we need to focus on, in particular, the true path that understands the emptiness of all phenomena. But anyway, we have to have this sincere conviction in the truths for throughout our practice of Buddhism and what have you. Secondly, vigor, or again, effort, is the delight in bringing them forth. You have to have this kind of enthusiastic delight in trying to bring those qualities of the understanding of the truths and so on into your mind. Then number three, the state of mind which does not forget the Four Noble Truths and their aspects is recollection or mindfulness. I mean, mindfulness is a non-forgetfulness. It means that we are actually going to keep them in mind and bring them into our meditation and so on. Samadhi, the fourth of these, which again is a Sanskrit word for meditative stabilization. Earlier I mentioned shamatha. Shamatha is the specific meditative stabilization called calm abiding. Samadhi is a more general term for all meditative stabilizations. And it's the one-pointedness of mind directed towards the various aspects of the truths. In this particular instance, it means that we are focusing single-pointedly on the Four Noble Truths and all that they hold in terms of especially the selflessness or emptiness of phenomena. And then wisdom, the fifth, or prajna, as it's called in the Sanskrit, the true discernment of those aspects. They do say that there are like four aspects for each of the Four Noble Truths. I won't go into all of them, but essentially we have kind of things that we realize within each of the Four Noble Truths. Recall the Four Noble Truths are the truth of dukkha, or suffering, it's usually translated as, which is the Buddha alerting us to how this realm of existence, samsara, is unsatisfactory. And we have to kind of get that at a very deep level. The second noble truth is the truth of the origins or causes of dukkha, which are our karma and our delusions, especially our ignorance. The third noble truth is the cessation, the true cessation of that it can all come to an end. Our causes of our dukkha, as well as the dukkha itself, completely removed. And that's due to the fact that everything is not inherently within the mind. It's all there adventitiously, and we can create antidotes to our delusions that uproot then our negative karma and so on. And then the fourth one is the true path that leads to that. And that includes, of course, meditating on emptiness, as well as practicing morality, concentration, and so on. But essentially, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths as being the object of our wisdom, the main wisdom that we need to generate to achieve supreme beatitude, liberation, enlightenment, is, of course, the realization of emptiness. That's why we're going to get more on emptiness coming up shortly. So that's kind of a brief explanation of these five. Again, faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration or meditative stabilization, and wisdom. And these are kind of really key factors in developing our minds on the spiritual path, according to the Buddha. It's kind of interesting. Oftentimes we don't think of faith having a whole lot to do with Buddhism, but as I've explained earlier, when we went through that topic in the beginning of the text, faith is really quite central. It's like the driving force through which we then aspire to achieve these things. If we don't have really a deep conviction in the Buddhist teachings, particularly the Four Noble Truths, it's very hard to move the mind in the direction of liberation and enlightenment. So let's carry on with the text here. It says, when they serve as the immediate cause for the attainment of the Arya path, the five are called the supreme dharmas. Again, we practice all five of these even before, the path of preparation. But when we talk about the path of preparation that prepares you for the Arya path, the path of seeing, again, that third path of the five paths, these five factors are called the supreme dharmas. During the patient stage of the path of preparation, they are referred to as the strengths, for they can no longer be overcome by their negative counterparts. This is just the name we give to them, because at that point, their negative counterparts won't be overcome. at the time of the heat or warmth stage is what it's called in this text of the same path. They are called the powers because they exert a great influence towards bringing about the realization of the truths. So again, the 4 levels of the path of preparation, I forgot to write them down, but let me see if I can remember them. We have there's heat, well, the last one. Let's start with the last one. The last one, just before you realize emptiness directly, is called supreme mundane qualities, meaning like before you go into the supramundane world of the path of seeing, this is the highest mundane qualities you can have, the highest worldly qualities you can have. Just prior to that, there's heat peak forbearance. I think it's heat peak forbearance. So the forbearance or the patience level is the 3rd one. That's where they become the strengths. And that carries over into supreme mundane qualities, which becomes the cause of the path of seeing. The heat is the very first of the 4 levels. And it's at that level that they become strong, but they're only called the powers there. They're not the strengths yet. So the powers carries over into the peak level. So heat, peak, forbearance, and supreme mundane qualities. The first 2, they're called the powers. The last 2, they're called the strengths. Again, just so you know. But it's more important just to understand that these are 5 features of our practice that we really need to tend to. Having great faith and conviction in the 4 Noble Truths through our own study and investigation, developing and that effort, that joyous enthusiasm for our practice that strives to make those reality for us. They're called the 4 Noble Truths because they are realized by noble beings, the Aryas, the 4 Arya truths. We want to become an Arya being so we know those truths at that deepest level. And then, of course, the 3rd, mindfulness, we have to recollect the 4 Noble Truths and their aspects and meditate on them using the 4th power of concentration. And then we eventually generate the wisdom that knows those truths in that way. That's the emphasis here. But again, they are called 2 different things depending upon where they occur. At the level of the 3rd level of the path of preparation, patience, they're called the strengths, and that carries over into the 4th level. And at the 1st level of heat or warmth, which carries over into peak, those are called the powers. Okay. And again, it says they exert a great influence towards bringing about the realization of the truths initially, and then they eventually cause the attainment of the Arya path, the path of seeing. And it says, and when these 5 have been developed, oops, sorry, what did I do there? To a point where the rudiments of virtue are no longer subject to retrogression, they are as well called the summits. Again, I haven't really heard this term of them being called the summits, but it's understandable that once you get to a place where you have no longer an ability to revert to any sort of non-virtue, your virtue will continue to develop. They attain a special status at that point. I would assume that that's at the path of seeing, but again, Geshe Sopa didn't explain that in his text, so I'm not sure what that term is of calling them the summits. We have a second section. Remember, there are 3 sections to this about supreme beatitude. This is the eschewal, the kind of turning away from conceit, a detrimental factor. It's kind of interesting if they throw conceit in here, but obviously your pride can still be an obstacle sometimes at pretty high levels of development, because we can still have that falling back into thinking, wow, I've really achieved something here, and thinking of kind of inflating our sense of self on the basis of that. And once you reach the path of seeing, of course, it won't arise at all, because there's no self that you're kind of grasping at that would be conceited, that you would be thinking highly of. So verse 46, conceit's arising is prevented by its antidote, which is the repeated contemplation of one's own non-exemption from sickness, aging, and death, and separation from desirable, and subjection to one's karma. So in essence, what they say, anytime that you have kind of a feeling of pride or conceit arising, all you have to do is say, well, I still experience suffering. I still have to deal with aging and illness, and I still haven't attained any great realization. So what am I so prideful about? I'm still in the boat of samsara. I haven't transcended to the other shore yet. So it's kind of a check if we had all those wonderful qualities and we're really, there, of course, as I said, you wouldn't even have conceit because there's no self that you're grasping at that you would feel conceited about. But the idea is that until then, we do have to kind of keep it in check and just say, well, what are we so prideful about? Why are we so conceited? We really don't have that much when it comes to our realizations. We might have some understanding of Dharma, some gaining of knowledge through our own study and practice. We haven't attained it yet. We're not there yet. So let's see what Venerable Rendawa says in his commentary on this. One should quite properly reflect. I'm not exempt from the conditions of sickness, aging, death, be separated from the desirable and have to face the undesirable, what have you. Likewise, I am not exempt from being subject to karma, which is to say that my personal well-being depends upon the karma I have performed in the past and is therefore not under my control. Right? Karma can rear its ugly head at any time in terms of bad karma. Good karma, we're happy when it comes into our lives, but that too, we don't have any control over. Things just happen on the basis of our past actions. So then he concludes this paragraph saying, pondering over this again and again prevents one from becoming conceited by virtue of the fact that it functions as the antidote for that attitude, right? They say another antidote to kind of conceit or pride is to think about all the things that one doesn't know. And one of the texts they say that you can examine, which is one of the texts we studied in the master's program that really kind of brings you down to earth in terms of your own understanding, is a book called, a text called the Abhidharma Kosha. It's the Treasury of Manifest Knowledge. And it's just like this encyclopedic work. And you read it and you just, it was the hardest text for me to study there, I think, because it's just list after list after list, and you're trying to kind of keep it all and put it all in perspective and correlate things from one chapter to the other. And there's a translation of a commentary that Wisdom has done on it, and it's like this big book like this, and just go through a few pages of that, and your pride will go out the door right away because it's like I can't even make sense out of this, So it's a hard text to study, and it really can bring you back down and say, wow, I really don't have that much knowledge. So the third of these topics, of course, in terms of developing supreme beatitude is the right view, meaning the right view of emptiness. We're going to have a brief presentation of emptiness, and then we're going to have an expanded explanation. I've made the decision to kind of abbreviate some of the expanded explanation and not go through the text maybe line by line, Venerable Rendawa's commentary, because it gets really kind of complex. And again, I'm just feeling that we've got, I don't know, 6 classes or something like that left in this course to try to finish off all these verses, and we're only at 47. So I'm not going to go into a detailed explanation, but Geshe Sopa does in his book. And if you want to read more about those, you're welcome to. The brief presentation. Right view produces the arising of the 5 spiritual faculties of faith and so forth, right? When we have that correct view of emptiness, then we gain greater faith, effort, mindfulness, and so on. Hence, the following verse is stated in order to illustrate the proper method of meditating upon this view. So, if you desire the higher realms and liberation, meditate upon the right view. Even good deeds by a person with wrong view all have dreadful fruition. So, in other words, what he's saying is that he's correlating here. If this is the section on liberation, achieving liberation and enlightenment, supreme beatitude, but he's even correlating an awareness of the correct view of emptiness to how we attain good rebirths. To some degree, when we have an understanding of emptiness, it again helps us to be assured that our virtues are going to be as useful as possible in creating the causes for continuity of good rebirths, and for us to keep striving towards attaining the realization of emptiness. So again, the right view of things corresponds very well in terms of our ability to attain a good rebirth. But moreover, the one kind of incorrect view, because oftentimes we talk about our ignorance having 2 facets, right? The one that we've been mainly talking about in this section is the right view of emptiness. So we do have an ignorance that clings to the opposite, that thinks that things exist inherently. But a coarser form of ignorance that is operative in most beings' minds as well is the wrong view, thinking that cause and effect don't exist, that karma is not operative, or maybe even having, maybe they don't go to the lengths of denying it, but they have an ignorance of it, right? Most beings in the world are going about living their lives with no awareness of the degree to which their actions in this life are going to affect their future existences, positively or negatively. So there is a correct view that we need in regard to that conventional teaching as well. So we're going to be going into, again, more on emptiness and how we are understanding emptiness as a means to achieving both high status and good and definite goodness or supreme beatitude. But we especially need initially an understanding of how karma works and an acceptance of that. It was interesting, Venerable Dundrup, who this Australian monk who I've known for quite a few years, and he did the teachings in Discovering Buddhism, the video that you probably have seen for the module on karma. And he says, in his estimation, it's perhaps the most important teaching in the Buddha's entire corpus, that paying attention to karma is something that plays out throughout our entire path. It plays out in terms of our gaining good rebirths, but it also plays out in terms of attaining liberation and enlightenment. So we kind of need both correct views. We need the right view that understands karma and the way that we create effects through attending to their causes. And we need the right view of emptiness, which also will help us to do things without the clinging to the self that keeps things moving in the direction of samsara and being unenlightened, that helps us to achieve good rebirths as well as the greater results of liberation and enlightenment. So let's look at the section on this. Again, there's not really too much for this brief presentation, but as we'll see, the expanded presentation or explanation goes much further. Here, reference is made to two right views, one having the ordinary world as its object, and one having the ultimate as its object. The first is the belief in the relationship between karma and its future results. Karma, we use karma to refer sometimes to the whole thing, cause and effect. Technically, karma means action. It means the cause, an action we do through our mind, through our speech, through our body, that has a resultant effect. And so we have the belief in that relationship between what we do now, the movements of our mind and so on, and the future results from that. The second right view is the wisdom which realizes the true nature, the tattva of all dharmas, the emptiness of all dharmas, all phenomena. So the first view is the cause which enables one to take birth in the higher states of existence, while the second view enables one to attain liberation. But as I was pointing out, I think we can say they influence both of them. The primary cause, of course, of getting a good rebirth is attending to the law of cause and effect, karma. And of course, the primary cause for attaining liberation is realizing emptiness. But nonetheless, they do play a role, together in our practice of the Dharma. Thus, if one is desirous of either the temporary well-being of the higher states or of the ultimate bliss of liberation, and of course, enlightenment, one should meditate continually upon the two right views just stated, the one with the ordinary world as its object, and the other having the ultimate as its object. Again, as I was pointing out, most beings have both of these ignorances operative. Now, there are many other forms of ignorance. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the Buddha didn't say that that's the only ignorance that sentient beings have, but they are the ones that play the key role in why we're going from life to life and why we're often ending up in these unfortunate states. It's because beings do things based on just following their delusions and creating that karma that is going to propel them into further suffering. And without that awareness of how things are actually happening, they don't have the means to do that. And I think that this is, some people, when they hear the teachings on karma, I think I mentioned to you when I told my father about it once, he said, wow, I'm glad I don't believe in that. But, it should seem like it helps us to actually know what we need to do. This is like valuable, priceless information. Sometimes we think karma feels like kind of a weight on our shoulders, and it's actually your door to freedom, your door to actually being able to affect your future existences, as well as to understand what needs to be done to create the causes for more lasting peace and happiness. Again, that supreme beatitude. So as I said, even though we can say karma, understanding karma is the main reason for gaining good rebirths, understanding emptiness is the main reason for attaining liberation and enlightenment, but nonetheless, they affect each other. When we have a stronger understanding of karma, it also does reinforce our understanding of emptiness, because things don't have any independent existence. They arise in dependence upon various factors. So these teachings are very much complementary. Karma and emptiness kind of work, hand in hand, to create the results temporally, and then eventually to create our ultimate results of liberation, enlightenment. So let's go back to the text and finish off this section. It says here, one might wonder what consequences would result from not practicing these views. If a person performs even good deeds, acts of generosity and such, with the wrong view which discredits the cause and effect of karma, that is, if deeds are performed in the absence of the right view, having the ordinary world as its object, all their karma will yield dreadful maturations. Dreadful is kind of a strong word. It just means it's only going to yield maturations within samsara, and could very well yield results of the suffering states of samsara. The maturations are dreadful, and that they are harsh, for the wrong view eradicates the rudiments of virtue. Again, if you are holding, because I think there is a difference, we have to kind of qualify to some degree, the difference between somebody who is ignorant of karma, which again, most beings in the world are, and someone who actually denies karma. That's what we often call the wrong view, that is kind of flying in the face of what the Buddha says exists. The wrong view is a very, very heavy karma, because once we get to the place where we say, no, what the Buddha taught doesn't apply, well, then we can do whatever we want, right? Because karma isn't operative. Most beings, again, don't go to that degree of investigating karma and denying it, but they still have an ignorance of karma. Does that mean that as long as you have that ignorance of karma, you never get any good results in samsara? Probably not, because I want to certainly think that someone who is a good practicing Muslim, or a good practicing Jew, or a good practicing Christian, or whatever the case might be, that if they are really taking their religion and philosophy to heart and practicing well, being kind and generous to others, they will get positive fruitions from that. We're not denying that karma doesn't work for them because they don't believe in karma. They haven't gotten to the place where they've denied karma, so they haven't created that heavy negative, action. But they still will be limited in what they can achieve. Beings who don't have a bigger understanding of the role that karma plays, and also, of course, the teachings on emptiness and what have you, are never going to go beyond just maturation of results in samsara. They're going to create causes for, maybe good existences within certain, periods and times, but they won't produce a more lasting happiness or peace. So there is something, and certainly I think if there are people who are holding a wrong view, denying karma really vehemently, well, then they're probably, again, more inclined to engage in non-virtue. And thereby, they're only going to see dreadful results, as is explained in that verse, right? Something that is going to lead them to more suffering, because they are only going to create non-virtue. So again, Geshe Sopa didn't go into this level of detail on this, but I really think we have to be careful with this. When it says even good deeds done by a person with wrong view all have dreadful fruitions, does that mean that even when we've had wrong view in another life? Again, I think you have to have that really forceful wrong view that denies karma to create this kind of dreadful results. If we have just an ignorance of karma, and that's bad enough. It is an ignorance, and it is kind of keeping beings blind from knowing that they're in charge of their own destinies. They're in charge of their own experiences. But I don't think it means that then even good deeds that those beings do from that place of ignorance, that they don't have any good fruitions from that. They will, of course. If we look at someone like Mother Teresa, who was so selfless in her, actions towards others and caring for others and really putting her own needs completely to the side. As far as I know, she was Christian. She didn't practice bodhicitta and all these other concepts and everything, but she was engaging in actions probably without an awareness of karma. I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe she did have some understanding of it, but does that mean she doesn't get any good fruitions from all of that? I doubt it. I don't think that that's how this verse is meant to be taken, or even the commentary. We have to trust that there is a law of karma that works. If you engage in generosity, regardless of what your awareness is of karma, you will get the fruits of that generosity, having resources in your future life. Of course, again, not having the full understanding of karma and all the things that are detrimental to us does lead, obviously, to the possibility of creating a lot more non-virtue. Because some people don't think anything. Even in our world, look, the very first of the 10 non-virtues, not killing. We want to avoid killing, right? Most beings don't have a problem engaging in killing of insects and other creatures that they don't want in their homes or what have you. And certainly even in wars and self-defense, people have no problem saying it's perfectly fine to kill the enemy, to kill people who are opposed to us or threatening us. And of course, that's, not good kind of place to work from. So there is the possibility, without the knowledge of karma, without removing that ignorance, of engaging in more non-virtue. So let me finish this off. It's one more paragraph on this idea, and I'm not going to probably say a whole lot more after that on it, because I think I've explained it as best as I can. So further, if a person performs even good deeds, such as giving and so forth, with the wrong view which apprehends entities as having a real and independent nature, that is, if the deeds are performed in the absence of the right view having the ultimate as its object, the maturation of all such karma is said to be dreadful, for it casts that person into samsara. Seeing that if they're making that dreadful too, well, then I guess all of samsara is dreadful, essentially. We're only going to have things ripen within samsara as long as we haven't dealt with the second type of ignorance through generating the correct view, the right view of how things exist ultimately. So again, both of these are being talked about in this section, both the kind of conventional correct view and the ultimate right view. But we're going to mainly talk about, in the remaining part of this, the ultimate view, though there are some references to things somewhat conventionally, though not really that much about karma anymore. All right, the expanded explanation. Let me read this little introduction, and then I want to show a slide. It says here, the first of this part's 5 subdivisions is the meditation upon what are called here the 4 well-established recollections. These are often called the 4 close placements of mindfulness. Actually forgot to pull that up just before the teaching tonight. So let me get that file up here. Got some slides that I want to share with all of you. Okay. And let me get that where I left off. Right there. Okay. Put the slideshow on. Whoops. Don't want to do that yet. Let me go back to Zoom. Okay. I'm ready to share. So again, I'm just giving you a few slides to get us kind of into this topic. So again, this is the section that we're in right now, an instruction. Whoops. Yeah, this is fine. We're looking at, again, we had the instruction to both householders and those departed from the home life. I mentioned this earlier. The Dharma common to both goals is what we just finished earlier today. And then the pursuance of supreme beatitude, which are these, 9 verses here, 45 through 54. So in terms of that, we're going to see first the 5 powers and the 5 strengths that we just looked at, conceit that we looked at, and then the right view. I thought there were 3 sections. I'm sorry, there are 6 sections to this. In the right view, we just looked at the brief presentation. Now we're going to go on to the expanded explanation, which includes this first verse, verse 48, meditating on these 4 well-established recollections, or again, they're often called the 4 close placements of mindfulness. And then we're going to go to a part where we recollect selflessness and look at some more teachings on that. And then we get to these other 3. We won't get to these 3 tonight at all. I think we'll be lucky if we get through to verse 50. So There are four types of mindfulness in this presentation of these four close placements of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings and sensations, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of all phenomena. These are common to both the Hinayana, those practicing the path to liberation, individual liberation, and the Mahayana, those practicing the path to Buddhahood. The first three, mindfulness of body, feelings, and mind, are covered in the next verse, Geshe-Sopa says. The last one will be covered separately because it requires a discussion of emptiness. So let's talk about these four just really briefly, because again, I don't want to go too deeply into it, but this is again, a common meditation practice that you don't really hear a lot about in the Mahayana, but nonetheless, bodhisattvas do practice this meditation. The Buddha set it out initially in the Pali Canon, in the Satipatthana Sutra, I think is what it's called, where he talks about there are four things that we can observe, and there are particular qualities of those that we want to observe. And I'm not going to go into all the detail, but the first one starts at the grossest level, our bodies. We kind of come to see the suffering natures of our bodies, that we look at them for what they are, as opposed to in the idealized way that we look at bodies and our mind of attachment and what have you. Feelings. By feelings, we don't mean the whole range of emotions. We mean the three main feeling tones that we have in response to anything that we experience. When you experience anything, even my talking, you're either going to have a pleasant sensation or a feeling, an unpleasant one, or a neutral one. And those are the three feeling tones that we have. Of course, they become the springboard for so many of the causes of our suffering, right? Our attachment to the pleasant feelings, our aversion and repulsion of the negative, unpleasant feelings, our indifference and kind of zoning out when we have the neutral experiences. Those three feelings are the doorway through which so many of our other sufferings ensue because of the minds of attachment and so on that arise in response to those. The third is a mindfulness of mind. And here we're looking at kind of mind itself, mind observing mind. Sounds kind of strange. But here is where we begin to see again the transitory nature of the mind and the fact that true cessations can occur because the disturbing aspects of our mind, anger and so on, are not there all the time, right? They can be ended even temporally and eventually be ended finally. And then the fourth is the mindfulness of phenomena. By phenomena, we mean everything that exists. And that's where we primarily apply the true path, the understanding of emptiness in particular. Now, again, in the Mahayana, you practice seeing the emptiness of all four of these. You correspond them to the Four Noble Truths, as I did: true suffering, true origins, true cessation, true path. But we again also see that all of these dharmas, all these phenomena, are empty of inherent existence. Nothing exists intrinsically. And that's what we're going to go into in more detail. What Geshe-Sopa was saying in that slide, and I'm just sort of setting the stage for you, is that in this section, this first part, verse 48, we're going to be looking primarily at how we would focus on bodies, feelings, and minds. And then we'll go on to talk about the main meditation on all phenomena, which is their emptiness, in the remaining verses in this section. So again, I realize it's not that clear from even the reading our commentary, but Geshe-Sopa's commentary makes it a little bit clearer, I think. So the first part of this is meditating on these four close placements. It says here, understand humans as being in actuality miserable, impermanent, having no self, and impure. Those in whom recollection has not been well established give heed to the four delusions, the source of ruination. Now, to these four that I just mentioned, the three we're talking about in particular, we're adding four misconceptions. Four misconceptions that are there in most of us, that we think that that which is in the nature of suffering, that is miserable, is actually in the nature of happiness, such as our feelings and our bodies and what have you. These are all conditioned phenomena in samsara. They are dukkha. They are not satisfactory. We also grasp at what is impermanent, changing moment by moment, as having some permanence. That is one of the other misconceptions that we all are subject to a great degree. The third one, having no self, in this context, it often refers to the coarser view of a self. We talk about this lack of an inherently existent self, but there's a coarser view of a self. I've talked about this, I think, before, even in this course, where they essentially say that we have a view that there is kind of an owner of the aggregates, the mind and the body, that there's somebody kind of there in charge. Jeffrey Hopkins uses the idea of like a sales department where you have all these people involved in the sales, but you have a head salesperson, right? The head salesperson says, you do this, you do that, whatever, and kind of guides them all around. And we even have that sense with ourselves that there's somebody here in charge. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that if you were asked, would you substitute your body you have now for a youthful 16-year-old body, right? We go, oh yeah, I'd do that in a minute. I'm feeling the aches and pains of this body. I would love to trade it out and get a new body, as if you're kind of in charge of a body that isn't really you, right? You're the controller. You're the one there that's in charge. So you think, oh, I'd change my body for this other body and then make that mine, and I would have kind of a new physical experience. And he says the same goes for our mind. There are many days where we would say, my mind is not feeling as sharp as I'd like it to be. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could trade out my mind for a really, mind that's so cutting and analytical and able to get at all these things that, are being taught or whatever. So we have that sense that there's a self, an I that's there in that role as kind of the master or the owner, the controller of this collection of stuff. That's a coarser view of the I, but it is one that we all have. Lama Tsongkhapa says every one of us has that innately. We think that there's someone in charge here. There's no one in charge. That being doesn't exist. And of course, when we do the deeper analysis, we get to the lack of an inherently existent self, meaning a self that is able to set itself up, that has its own entity. That's a much subtler view of a self. We'll talk about that probably later tonight if we get to it. But the idea is that in this context of these four misconceptions, this is often presented as having the misconception of let me see if I can get this on the screen now. I hope that's being seen. Yeah, it's being seen on the tablet. I can see down there, John's. Oops, that's not what I wanted to show. I'm sorry. I wanted to go back to the text. Clicked on the wrong one, sorry. In the context of these four misconceptions, again, we see that this third one of having no self is, this is the antidote to our...
Yes.
On the TV screen? You're not? Okay. Let me get out of that then. Just 1 second, folks at home. We're having a little problem here with this. I think I have to get out of that. Once I do that, okay, then I think I should be able to share it. Okay. Is the verse on there now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're back to verse 48. Again, we have these four misconceptions: that which is miserable, thinking that it is happiness; that which is impermanent, thinking it's permanent; that which has no self, thinking it does have a self; and that which is impure, having purity. This is the fourth one. We think that, again, things in samsara, our bodies and so on, have a natural purity when that doesn't exist at all. So, this gets confusing, but we're talking about these four misconceptions in relation to the first three close placements of mindfulness. So let's go to the commentary again. This section I'm going to go through, but as I said, the next section, when we get into recollecting selflessness, I'm probably going to skip over quite a chunk of that. The human being is to be understood as being in actuality, that is, when examined with wisdom, miserable, in that they possess the three forms of suffering, right? These aggregates that we have, especially the body, is in the nature of suffering. It doesn't have a nature of happiness at all. What we consider happiness is not lasting happiness, is not a happiness that we can rely upon. It's transitory. It's only in kind of contrast to the suffering feelings that we have. They are also impermanent in that they exist for no more than an instant, meaning that everything is momentarily changing. Again, we think contrary to that. We think things have some sort of static existence. And then third, without a self nature, since there is no absolute person who is the controller of their own being. Again, that controller or head salesperson or whatever, there's no being kind of playing that role. That doesn't exist. And because their nature is one of being a mass of bone, flesh, blood, and so forth, understand that the human being is impure. We have many meditations on this. Master Shantideva does a very lengthy meditation on the impurity of the body in his 8th chapter of The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. But we see that, just look at it. I mean, if we get attracted to this superficial element of the body, right? This skin that covers all this. If you were to remove, like, just a layer of skin from the body, the entirety of the body, just this little, like, I don't know, millimeter or something smaller than that, perhaps, you would find the body repulsive, right? You would, all blood and veins and everything would be revealed. And so we kind of ignore that fact. We get attracted to the outside and the appearance of things and how beautiful things look, not seeing what is inside that. Master Shantideva calls it a bag of filth, essentially, because if you were to look at, kind of what's all in there, it's not that attractive. Geshe Sherab once, he pointed out something really quite interesting. He says, what happens when you take a piece of food and you put it in your mouth, right? There's almost a feeling, we even kind of accept this. We don't think about it so much because we probably get too repulsed. But there's something kind of contaminated about that food already. You wouldn't take it back out and give it to someone else, right? Once you've kind of put it in your mouth, you're already kind of aware that there's some sort of contamination that happens there. But we live with that and we kind of accept that, but we don't go deeper and say, well, this is, and again, it's not so that we get to this place where we like have revulsion for everybody around us and we like hate them because they all have these bodies that are bags of filth. This is to kind of come to see what we are dealing with here. This is not satisfactory, folks. When you attain Buddhahood, you're no longer conditioned in this way. You can appear to have a body like that, but you don't have that body. You have a purified body. Then it's really pure. Right now, our bodies are nothing like pure. They don't have any real purity. And these are hard meditations to do, but they are to show us that we have a lot of misconceptions that we're living with. So those who have not established their recollection well or close in this manner, that is, who have not examined themselves with wisdom, regard the impure body as being pure, feelings that are miserable in nature as being pleasurable, the impermanent mind as permanent, and dharmas lacking a self as possessing such. These 4 beliefs are called the 4 delusions. So again, all 4 close placements could be correlated to this. But as Geshe Sopa was saying, we're mainly talking about kind of focusing on the first 3, seeing our bodies more accurately, our feelings more accurately, our minds more accurately. And then to get to the level of all phenomena or dharmas, that we have to see that they lack a self in the coarser way as well as in the much subtler way that we're going to go into. Since they are a cause for samsara and the inferior states of existence, they should be considered the source of all ruin, these 4 misconceptions. Hence, one should make one's recollection well established. One should come to see the nature of things as they are, rather than living with these misconceptions. By the way, I'll mention that, Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the book Bodhisattva Attitude, he goes into a nice little explanation of those 4. Then we have next is meditation, in particular upon the well-established recollection of dharmas. Again, the close placement, that is the 4th one, on dharmas or phenomena, and more specifically recollecting selflessness, not just at the coarse level, but at the subtler level, where we see that not only is there not a controller here, there is also no real self here, no real I existing here. So one may well assent to the statement about the conditions of being miserable, etc., yet still wonder how the condition of having no self is to be understood. If there is no self, then who is it that experiences the results of virtuous and non-virtuous karma? The following verse replies it was declared that form is not the self does not possess form, the self is not seated in form, and form is not seated in the self. Understand the remaining four aggregates as similarly empty. So let's talk about this first in terms of the question that's raised. So if there is no real self, no kind of self that has an established identity throughout all time, that is kind of who you are at your deepest essence, well, then who is it that experiences the fruitions? If I engage in virtuous or non-virtuous karma in this life, who is it that experiences my future results of that? People have a dilemma to some degree when you think that if there's nothing that is carried over in terms of a lasting self into the next life, well, then you don't have the basis for the experience of those karmas that were created by something that is different than it. There is a different self in a sense, in that when I am together with the aggregates that we call Dawn, so my consciousness, this sense of an I is here together with this collection. When I commit particular actions and the karmic fruitions are there when I die, my consciousness leaves this life. It unites up with another set of aggregates, another body, and perhaps a different type of mind, depending upon what karma I've created for what type of existence. But the mind stream, of course, is the thread that runs through all of this. But there's no kind of carryover of the self. There's a thought of a self that's always there. We always think of whatever we have as kind of being who we are in some manner. But the idea is that that is enough for the experience to occur. We don't need to carry over some sense of self that is this kind of constant. There was a lot of confusion, I think, when the Buddha taught. Frequently he would say, what, in the Jataka tales, for example, and we've quoted from a few of those earlier, where he would say something like, when I was born as the Monkey King, or when I was, oops, got it muted, I think, when I was born as the Ruru deer, or when I was born, meaning like as if there's some sort of eternal I that was the Buddha that was born as these particular beings. Well, there isn't, and that's even a kind of an even coarser view of an I that is some sort of soul or Atman or something that takes these different manifestations. There's no I that can be found in any of these ways, but yet cause and effect plays out. The actions that Dawn engages in, what we're labeling as Dawn here, this collection of stuff, creates karma that is then experienced by whatever being is there in the next life. That is, this thread of consciousness runs through. Again, and that's the question that's being posed, and it's one of the reasons why many of the other Buddhist schools that are kind of inferior in their view to the Prasangika Madhyamaka, what we study here in this tradition, many of the other ones point to something that they say has to be the I. Most of them say it's the consciousness, maybe like the mental consciousness in particular, that thread of consciousness is the I. But of course, the analyses that we do don't find that that can hold up under that investigation. Well, is that what we mean by I when we think of I? Is that what we really can find to be the I? It's the consciousness. It's not the I. The I is based on the consciousness, and of course, and the form, the body. So anyway, there's a lot of questions that come up around this. To kind of transition into the answer, I'm not going to explain every element of this verse, simply because I think it goes way too deeply into some of the philosophical things that are around this misconception that we have of an I. Essentially, when we talk about this innate ignorance, that again was part of the two ignorances that we are dealing with in this section. The first one had to do with ignorance of karma. The second one is the ignorance of the true nature of ourselves, as well as all phenomena. When we get to that level of it kind of being an innate ignorance, we don't go through much analysis with that at all. We don't think I am my body, or I am my mind, or I am this, or I am that. We just think that I is real. That's the level of ignorance that is propelling us from life to life, is believing that there's a real I there. However, we can also have ways that this is strengthened through learning incorrect views and through different tenets or different teachings that we get. I think even in our other traditions outside of Buddhism, there's often a reification of the self that occurs that can be influencing us in an unhealthy way. And that's where we get to these ideas like such are mentioned in the verse, that form might be the self, our body might be the self. That might be the real I. Well, again, we don't think that way naturally. I don't think I'm my body, but we do think we're real. And that reality, that level of that status that we give ourselves, if it came down to proving whether that exists or not, we would have to look at the body and the mind, all the five aggregates, and see, are they actually the real self? That sense of a real I, where is it then? If there's a real I here sitting on this chair or this cushion, well, where is it? It's got to be one of these things. So all five aggregates can be analyzed, and they can be analyzed in terms of the same way that this verse was spelled out for form. So let me put it back on, and I'm not going to go into huge explanations of it because I think, again, it goes kind of beyond what we need to understand for this course. Form is not the self. There's like this making them the same, so you have that similarity that form and the self are identical. Secondly, the self does not possess form, there's not like a self that owns the form, our body. The self is not seated in form, kind of being supported on form, nor is form supported on the self. Kind of two different ways of an interdependence. Now, again, all of the last three of them are all something where the self and the body are different. The self is the possessor of the form. The self is seated in the form on the self, supported on the self. But the first one is an identical thing. So essentially, we have kind of two main things that are being spelled out. Either the self, let me go back to taking this off screen. Either this strong sense of an I that we think is real, either we're talking about the first aggregate here, form, either it is identical to form, or it is something that is different than form that has a relationship with that form. It is possessing that form, and the way that I possess my body, or it is the body is supporting the self, or the self is supporting the body. You have to have kind of some relationship going on there. Then you would do the same thing with feelings. You would say either the feelings are the real I, or the I possesses feelings, and so on. You would do these same four thoughts with regard to each of those, which are essentially proving the two main things. Either the real I is identical to one of the aggregates, or it is completely different from the aggregates in an unrelated way. And we don't find the I to exist in either of those ways. That's the same analysis that we do when we do our 4-point analysis. Most of you are familiar with that analysis, right? Where we essentially bring to mind that strong sense of this real I. We say, well, how could it exist? It exists either the same as the aggregates or different from the aggregates. And by different, we mean utterly, independently, unrelatedly different. And then we go look in those two places. Is there something that is the same as the aggregates that is the I? Is it the form, our body? Is it our feelings? Is it our discriminations? Is it our compositional factors, all the other mental components? Is it our consciousness itself? Do we find any of those to be equivalent to the I? In this strong sense of an I that is real. So in this verse, there's not much more going on than that, but it gets more complicated simply because we introduce these four thoughts of the first one, identical. The other three have to do with it being different in the form of being a possessor, in the form of supporting or being supported by that aggregate. Okay, I know I'm using a lot of terminology tonight, but this boils down in essence to the same analysis that I just pointed out, the 4-point analysis that we all know and love dearly, that we've engaged in hopefully many times to try to see that there's no real I here. The real I seems to exist. That's the first step. Bring it to mind and how it appears at those times when the sense of I is quite strong, right? When we're threatened or we have something that we need to defend, then we go look, we determine what are the possibilities for that I. Does it exist as the same as the mind and body complex, the aggregates, or is it completely and utterly different? And then we look in those two places. You should come to the conclusion at the end of all this that it doesn't exist. That's emptiness. That's selflessness. You get to that place of not finding what you thought was so real in the first step. And think about it, when you've been falsely accused of something, remember how the eye seems to rear its, kind of force and say, how dare you do that to me? How dare you accuse me of that? That's when it's much stronger. We have it at a subtler level frequently, but we can see it more prominently then. It seems to be so real, but there's no real I here. So again, that's all I'm going to do for tonight because we're already at 7:30. I'll see if there are some questions, but next week, I'm just going to maybe very briefly go through a few of the comments in regard to this verse, but we'll kind of keep it moving because otherwise I'm afraid, again, we're going to get a bit bogged down. Yeah, Mary Jo, please.
That last verse, that reminds me a lot of this. I think it's called the Diamond Sutra. I don't know it in Janice. And it's in, and
It's the Heart Sutra. Yeah.
the Heart Sutra.
Yeah.
And that it kind of reminds me of that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Mary Jo was saying how much this verse reminded her of the Heart Sutra. In the Heart Sutra, we have that saying, form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is none other than form is also none other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, consciousnesses are also empty. Likewise, Shariputra, all phenomena are emptiness. They have no defining characteristics, they are unproduced, they do not cease, and so on. I mean, it's a wonderful discourse on the similar type of thing. We don't find a real I to exist in any of these things, nor do we find that they have their own reality as what we have identified them as. So when we talk about the body, which is the form aggregate, the body has no inherent existence as the body, because if we look at the parts of the body, we don't find anything in the parts of the body that withstands analysis that is the real body. Body is a label we put on this collection of stuff. And then we look at another part of the body, such as our head. Head is the label we put on this collection of stuff, with the mouth and the nose and the eyes and the ears and the skull and the brain and all that stuff going on there. And we look at any one of those parts and we don't find that it has any inherent existence, because what we call an eye is only a label we give to this collection of the retina and the pupil and all the various, parts of the eye. And go to any one of those. It's like, and they call it like peeling an onion. You never find anything that's the real core. It's right there, never kind of get to it and say, okay, I found you now. We don't find it. That's emptiness, the not finding what we believed in so concretely. Okay. Any other questions or comments from folks online or in the Gompa?
I know you've been doing this for quite a while. Can you share with me a little bit about your path of getting, do you feel like you're in emptiness? I don't know.
That's a good question, but I mean, the question was whether about my own path of development and my understanding of this, and whether I feel like I'm in a place where I'm in emptiness or understanding emptiness or having that knowledge. Oh, I'm certainly just still at the conceptual level and refining my concept of emptiness every time I teach it, every time I meditate on it, every time I read about it. I mean, certainly I feel blessed that somehow through the teachings I've had through many great masters and my study over in Italy, that a lot of supposed and I seemingly correct understanding of emptiness has been generated in my mind, but that's all it is. It's still really very, very conceptual. Nothing that I can say that I've had some amazing experience, where I've had any deeper insight. But again, that comes with a lot more meditative focus as well, an ability to kind of draw it into the mind much more deeply, which I don't have. I'm not somebody who's dedicated, years of my life to meditating and developing that skill and ability, which I need to do at some point, obviously, if I'm ever going to bring any understanding to a deeper level. But nonetheless, even having it conceptually is a pretty important milestone for all of us, to kind of grok emptiness, that term from Stranger in a Strange Land, kind of grok it, to get it, to kind of work with it, to be able to be aware of it as we go about our daily lives, because it disempowers things. this whole thing that when we talk about the I here, I'm only gonna go for a little bit. I realize I'm after the time, but when we grasp at this kind of concrete sense of an I, this is the main focal point for realizing emptiness. Why? Because that's where we get in trouble. Being attracted to the pleasurable sensations and the objects that bring those, and then being repulsed by the things that are unpleasant and so on. And we vacillate around that concrete sense of a real I. And if we begin to let some of that go, then we're not as caught up in all of it. It's more like watching a movie than it is, you know, really getting totally engaged in it and feeling hurt when people do things or excited when this is happening or what have you. Again, I'm not saying I'm free of all those misconceptions, I'm not, but when you can bring that understanding into your everyday life, then things seem somewhat disempowered because they don't have the ability to kind of generate that because we've gotten rid of the focal point of this strong sense of a real me being here. So I don't know, maybe that gives, but it takes time. Back to your question, what is the stages of going through this? It takes time, obviously. And I have to say that I suspect that I must have had some past life imprints because one of the very first times I heard about emptiness, which was actually not when I first started studying Buddhism. I didn't hear about it until I think it was Venerable Rabina was teaching it. And she was teaching particularly on a lot of things that were in Meditation on Emptiness by Jeffrey Hopkins, which is a pretty dense book. I still haven't read it from cover to cover, but I brought it home and I could not put it down. I was like, this is so fascinating that things don't have this mode of existence, which I hadn't heard in Buddhism prior to this. And so there was something there that I must have had from the blessings of teachers from prior lives or this life or something that kind of spurred some intellectual curiosity, at least about this concept. To develop it more just takes keeping that curiosity. Go back to those 5 factors. If you have faith in and this kind of confidence in emptiness and in the teachings that the Buddha is giving, and then you have an effort and a desire to keep pursuing it through, again, continued meditation, study, reading, what have you, going to teachings. And then, of course, you recollect it, bring it to mind frequently as much as you can in your daily life, try to develop some meditation on it, and then eventually generate the wisdom. Makes sense, right? This is what we're trying to do. So we just keep doing it, keep staying kind of interested and excited by the concept. So thank you for that. But I still feel like my knowledge is like that.
Well, I don't.
Well, you're very kind. Okay. Let's go ahead and close for tonight. If you do have additional questions, please write them down and maybe remind me at the beginning of next week that you have a question and I will be sure to address it. We do want to do the dedications before we do the prayers, dedication prayers. So we have a dedication list here. Jana is going to recite those dedications that are on the list here at the center.
No. We dedicate the merit that was generated from this wonderful teaching to those beings experiencing obstacles, specifically Stella, Bill, Patty, Alyssa, Laura, Hag A, Maggie A, Robin, Les, Lucille J, Tate the cat, Jana. For those beings experiencing illness, specifically Stella, John, Jana, Bill, Patty, Don, Mary Jo, Thelma, Ben Anderson, Barnett, Raven, Chacon, Rosemary P, Bill C, Robin C, Jane, Janice, Baldo, Persine G, Susan L, and Jim. And for those beings who have died in the last 49 days, we dedicate for Ian Hobner, Mummy Max, Alice Frank, Virginia Ellen, Winslow A, the spider, the baby dog, brown dog, Audrey K, and Norm.
And
Yeah, Bill Ryan too.
For death.
Yeah.
and Ryan Price as well. Tegan has asked, or
Oh, I'm sorry, I got that wrong.
oh, okay,
Ryan Price.
that's the one.
Oh, Ryan Price.
Ryan
Yeah, I'm
Price.
sorry, I got it. I couldn't see it, so I switched to it again.
Okay.
And
Would
please,
you please add I think 7 World Kitchen
Oh,
volunteers,
Hmm.
and there have been other volunteers also in the Gaza conflict
Yeah.
at the World
Even if it
Kitchen.
does, and they're gonna need more pages.
Yeah. And then one more for death when you're done, Jana.
Okay,
Philip Gonzalez.
Philip Gonzalez.
Yeah. All right. And I'm sure there are others that I'm not thinking of, but
O.J. Simpson.
yeah. Okay, so we have, again, any other names to be added? Let me take this off. All right, then let me put the prayers on the screen and then Jana will lead us in dedicating. Get this down there. And let me get that back up. Okay.
Due to the merits
Of
of
these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state.
May the
Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more.
For His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish granted,
Wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
And for also Hita Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, and intentionally descending again
into a family of a far distant land,
we make this request, O Lama, please live long. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Buddha's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you all. And in closing, I might mention that again, this Saturday, April 13th, is the 1-year anniversary of Lama Zopa having shown this aspect of passing away. And we're continuing to make strong prayers for his return swiftly. So again, it's good this Saturday to do some of these practices. Remember, one of the main practices is to recite chanting the names of Manjushri. You can find that text at the FPMT's website, I'm sure, very easily. And you can recite that on Saturday. If you can recite it a number of times, it doesn't take that long to recite it. It's a very powerful practice. And then there's also any other, the pujas and things can be done that can be dedicated. I know TNL and Santa Fe is going to be doing puja from 1 to 3:30, a rather long thing that they're doing for Rinpoche on Saturday. So you can tune into that on Zoom, but many other centers offering things if that doesn't work with your timing. Just important, there are practices, there's even a booklet about practices to do on the anniversary of your guru's passing. If you consider Rinpoche your guru, and even if you didn't consider him your guru, I think it's powerful for those involved in the organization to do their best to create the causes for him to swiftly return. So just know that that's going on, and it's good to partake in those if you can on your own, or again, through other groups online, what have you. All right.
Mhm.
Okay.
I want to say hi to Eloise.
Oh.
Is
Hi,
there-
Eloise.
Hi, hi, nice to To see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
Great. Okay, everyone. Thank you all. And I will see you next Thursday. I'll be back up here and we'll have some continuing classes to hopefully get through the text before the end of May. So, all right, blessings, everyone.